Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, Labour's Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer has given a keynote speech this morning setting out the party's position on Brexit. This comes as party grandees like Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson have criticised the current leadership for not having sufficiently clear policies on Brexit. This is what Keir Starmer had to say. If elected in June, Labour would scrap the government's Brexit white paper and replace it with a new Brexit strategy. The new strategy would, according to Keir Starmer, focus on retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union in order to protect jobs and the economy. A Labour government would also unilaterally guarantee the rights of EU nationals living in the UK on their very first day in office. Labour would also drop the Great Repeal Bill. That's the government's planned legislation which aims to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act and also convert current EU law into UK law. Instead, Labour would bring forward a new EU rights and protections bill. According to Keir Starmer, this bill would safeguard workers' rights and environmental protections. And I'm happy to say Keir Starmer is here with us now. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Now, there seemed to be a lot of talk about process in your speech today. I listened to pretty well all of it. Would it be fair to say that you and the government have virtually the same policy objectives when it comes to Brexit?
No. We are putting jobs and the economy first. The Prime Minister is putting immigration first. And that's a really fundamental difference. Now, I've never underplayed the importance of immigration. I've never suggested that the referendum didn't have tied up with it the question of freedom of movement. It's a major factor. I've never suggested that freedom of movement doesn't need to change. But it is a very odd situation indeed when immigration is elevated to a priority above the economy and drives the Prime Minister's approach. Right. And it has driven her approach.
But that's tone and that's emphasis. In terms of policies, what are the differences? Because if we look at your decision to go unilaterally for guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens, but the government has said that that is going to be a priority. It's crucial. They back it wholeheartedly. So the end result will be both parties guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens who are here in the UK.
I think there's a fundamental difference between unilaterally making the decision on day one that that's what you're going to do and saying we will have it as a priority in the negotiations. What the Prime Minister can't do is to give any guarantee that this will be resolved until the 2 years is up. She cannot do that.
Are you suggesting that people will be deported in any way?
No,
are you suggesting that the rights of... Well, then in the end, the policy objective is the same.
I really don't think it helps to undermine the genuine concern that millions of people have in this country. We've all seen them in tears, etc. And simply to revert to, well, they'll, are you saying they'll be deported? Of course I'm not, but they're anxious. I've got people saying to me, well, what is my status going to be? What sort of time will I be allowed? What do I do with my children? What's my rights, etc. They're genuinely concerned about it. The major difference, it's a big difference. Will you unilaterally take this action on day one, or will you put it in the mix with no guarantee that it's going to be resolved for 2 years?
But when you say there's no guarantee, the implication there is that those rights of EU citizens to remain in the UK with the same sorts of life that they have now will not happen under a Tory government in Brexit negotiations, when they've made it very, very clear that this is going to be a priority in the negotiations. So it may not be day one, but it could be 2 months down the line. And the end result will be the same as yours.
I absolutely accept that the Prime Minister and David Davis are committed to protecting the rights of EU citizens. But I really think that to underestimate the anxiety and concern that there is about when this is going to be resolved, and that's why we will unilaterally take this action on day one. It's a policy decision open to the Prime Minister. She's refused to take it to date, and she's not said she'll do it after. Now, just let me complete on this, because people say, well, in which case you're not concerned about UK citizens in the EU. That is completely not true. Of course we're concerned about them.
Except they might not reciprocate, of course.
They're equally anxious about their position. But I genuinely think, from very many conversations I've had across Europe, that if we took that unilateral action, it would be the quickest way to solve this impasse,
All right.
to resolve it overall.
Let's look at another policy objective that you outlined in your speech. You're going to scrap the government's Brexit white paper and replace it with a new strategy that will focus on retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union. How is that different to the government's negotiating objective, which David Davis said is for frictionless trade and having exactly the same benefits as we currently have? They're the same.
What we're saying is businesses must be able to succeed in the future in the way they've succeeded in the past. Now, you'd say, well, anybody would say that, and right they would. The question is, what sort of approach are you going to take to achieve that? What the government has done, because it's put immigration as its #1 priority, is to take virtually all other options off the table. So any arrangement with the single market's off the table. Any arrangement with the customs unions off the table.
You say you still want the UK to be in the single market?
Let me complete this. Any relationship with the European Court of Justice, even where disputes have to be resolved, is off the table. Even coming out some of the agencies such as Europol and Eurojust, agencies that I've worked with, which do effective work in countering crime, they're all off the table because the priorities are wrong. And we're saying, have the right priorities, leave options on the table. Now, I'm not pretending that unreformed or the single market membership can go hand in hand with my acceptance that freedom of movement has to change.
Right, has to change, because that's very important, because you said you haven't underestimated that immigration was an important part for many people of this whole debate and the vote. Does freedom of movement end, in your mind, under Labour's policy on Brexit?
Yes.
Right,
But it doesn't mean no movement. Of course it does, because it's an EU rule, and we've said it has to come to an end. I've said on numerous occasions the status quo has to change.
Except you didn't say it in your speech. You said it had to change.
Immigration rules have to change. I repeat, immigration rules have to change. I've said, I don't know how many times in the last 6 months, that freedom of movement is coming to an end and that the status quo is unsustainable. I've said over and over again.
So
and we've also said...
Why is that message not getting across, do you think? Because people aren't completely clear on what you're saying, and you barely mentioned it in your speech today. You say we recognise that immigration rules have to change. You didn't say or reiterate, even if you said it in the past, that in your mind, freedom of movement, in terms of the EU, is coming to an end.
Well, because it's obvious that it's coming to an end,
well,
and the rules must change. But I really think it's not fair of you to construe it as if that's not been the consistent thing I've been saying for 6 months.
You may have been saying it consistently, but not everybody in the Labour Party. And actually, let's just have a listen to Peter Mandelson, a senior figure from the Labour Party, who said this in response to questions about Labour Party policy on Brexit.
What is the Labour position on Brexit now?
Well, search me. I mean, I think you need to wait for the manifesto. I mean, the problem for the Labour Party in this election on Brexit is very clear, and that is that they are not, I'm afraid, differentiating their position and their policy sufficiently from the government, or haven't done so up until now, which they needed to do if they were going to offer the voters a clear choice.
Which is along the lines that I've been asking you in terms of clear policy differences between you and the government. I accept that the process may be different in terms of getting to those objectives that you have outlined, the tone and the emphasis, but in terms of policy objectives, they're pretty much the same. I mean, does the Labour Party want to stay in the customs union? You
just rattled through the 5 or 6 things that we said we would do pretty well immediately, which are a change of position for the government. So to say they're precisely the same is contrary to everything that's said at the top of your programme. As far as the customs union is concerned, if you're in the manufacturing sector, there is huge concern about coming out of the customs union. Now, the government said we're not even prepared to contemplate staying in it or even to talk about amending it. We say leave it on the table. It may be that we can't stay in the customs union and a judgment call is going to have to be made at the end of the exercise. But what the Prime Minister has done is to clear all of the options off the table before we've started. We say it's insensible in negotiations to give yourself maximum flexibility, to be smart about the way you negotiate. What we've ended up with this Prime Minister is a rigid and reckless approach where viable options have just been swept off the table, are simply not there to even be discussed anymore.
Right. You talked then about the customs union. If we don't leave the customs union, then what would happen to the ability to do free trade deals?
I appreciate that. But we need to focus on the EU trade deal, which is 44% of our trade, and get the right trading arrangement. We need to look at the customs union as well and see at the end of the exercise where we are on both of those issues. But what the government has done is say we'd take the customs union off the table altogether. That's a judgment call when we know what deal we've done with the EU so far as EU trade is concerned. And I'm not suggesting that nothing can ever change or should change. What I am saying is, if you take options off the table, you can't even come back to them in 2 years, where it makes good sense that that will be the position you ended up in.
In an election, though, the messages have to be clear, don't they? And I understand this is a complicated process, and having a more nuanced message, or one that needs a bit of explanation, which may be totally credible, is more difficult to get across to voters in an election.
But it's very easy to get across the idea that you're taking all the options off the table. The real question on the table is, what best guarantees the right outcome for our country? Because that matters much more than anything else.
All right, well, let's have a look at workers' rights just briefly before we come to an end. You want to replace the government's Great Repeal Bill with a new EU Rights and Protections Bill. What's the difference apart from the title?
Well, first, the government has said it will protect workplace rights. I accept that.
Right.
It's been a bit looser about environmental rights, consumer rights, and it says it won't protect human rights. So there's a difference there.
They've said they won't protect human rights.
Yes, so far as the Charter of Fundamental Rights is concerned, they said that's not going to be in their bill. But secondly, we have to look at what's going to happen in this election. If there's a Tory government return with a majority, the temptation to row back on this and not to fully implement these rights.
Right, so you don't believe them, which is fine. You don't believe that the Tories will actually uphold their commitment. But what is the difference between the Great Repeal Bill, which is going to take all this EU law, and then there will be a decision further down the line as to which bits of legislation they're going to keep, and your EU Rights and Protections Bill, if we take what the government takes at face value, which is they say they are going to protect workers'
This is a clear entrenchment of the full list of rights, along with the means of enforcing them that aren't in the current proposals, and it is a guarantee against rolling back here. And that guarantee will not be available after the election if there's a Tory majority. Half the cabinet, I mean, Priti Patel in the cabinet was campaigning the referendum on the basis she wanted to halve workplace rights, halve social rights. These are people in the cabinet now. We are absolutely right to say this is a point of distinction, and we want to introduce legislation which will entrench these rights and point out a fundamental difference.
Keir Starmer, thank you very much. I think we can listen now to Damien Green, the Work and Pensions Secretary, on his views to what Keir Starmer has had to say today.
It's completely incoherent, the Labour position. They're saying that they wouldn't accept no deal, which means they would have to go into these negotiations saying, whatever happens, we will do a deal at the end of it. That's not a strong negotiating stance at the start of what will be a long and complex negotiation, and it's characteristic of the weak and incoherent leadership that Jeremy Corbyn provides the Labour Party and the coalition of chaos that lies behind us with the other parties, that they can't come up with a basic negotiating plan that will stand any scrutiny.
Well, that was Damien Green. We're joined now by the Conservative MP Dominic Raab and by Alistair Carmichael for the Liberal Democrats. Welcome, gentlemen. Before I come to you, your impressions there of what Keir Starmer has said. Do you see the clear differences between what Labour is offering in terms of Brexit negotiations if they were to win the election compared to the Conservatives?
No, I don't. And I suppose one of the central issues, and I speak as a sort of layperson in this and not a politician, is on something as central to the future of this country as the negotiations on Europe. Why isn't the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, making a statement about this? Why isn't he talking about this issue? Why has he left it to Keir Starmer?
Well, he is, of course, the person doing the Brexit
and I suppose,
brief.
you know, when you look back over the referendum issue and the lead into the referendum, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, went AWOL, went missing on this, and you know, he said that the Labour Party was for remaining in Europe, but his private position was very, very unclear.
Right,
and
although two-thirds of Labour voters did, in the end, broadly speaking, back Remain.
And I think voters actually make their own decisions on that.
All right. Welcome to both of you again. Dominic Raab, first of all, do you think Labour's Brexit objectives, having heard what Keir Starmer has said today, are actually extremely similar to your own in terms of the end game? And it shows that then Jeremy Corbyn could be a very credible Prime Minister on the issue of Brexit.
Nice try, Joe. Look, Keir Starmer has been banging on for months that we need a clear, detailed plan. The government's produced one. He said he would scrap it, but hold on, we're not going to tell you what Labour would do until after the election. I think the much bigger issue for any voter is going to be who do you want going into bat in these negotiations with Jean-Claude Juncker, with Angela Merkel? Is it the weak leadership of Jeremy Corbyn or the strong, experienced leadership of Theresa May?
Well, we know that the Tories want to paint the election in that way. They want to pit, obviously, Theresa May versus Jeremy Corbyn in exactly the...
Well, hang on,
but when we come to the plan, I cannot see any material difference. David Davis, as I said to Keir Starmer, wants his Brexit deal to deliver exactly the same benefits that we currently have. So, for example, in terms of the single market and the customs union, he wants to retain all those benefits. Keir Starmer has said he wants to do exactly the same. So there's no difference between what you're saying and what Labour is saying.
Well, Joe, the difference is this. You're right to say there's fudge on Labour's part, but we've set out a white paper in detail all of our approach. You had 2,000 words. It could have been an op-ed in a paper from Keir Starmer saying, wait until after the election, we'll fill in the gaps then, and that is the difference. And we know that the plan Theresa May has set out for post-Brexit Britain has attracted strong support from the public. They want to see us rally behind the government, get the best deal, and every vote for the Conservatives will strengthen our chances of getting the best deal.
But it's the same as Labour's, basically, in terms of the policy.
No,
well, we do know they want to unilaterally. Well, they want to make a unilateral move. Let me finish. Let me finish.
2,000 words.
You can keep hammering home your election messages, but what voters will want to know is there anything different in terms of the two parties' approach? Well, we do on certain things that we've just gone through, and they're the same as far as people can see. Alistair Carmichael, if Theresa May wins this election, will you finally accept that she has a mandate to take the UK out of the single market?
We are looking for our own mandate in this election, so I mean that's what this election is all about. And I think you've made a fair point today that as far as the Labour position is concerned, Keir Starmer has come up with something that is a distinction without a difference, quite frankly. It is going in the same direction. They've been fairly clever about it because the Labour Party has this difficulty that a big chunk of the seats that they represent in the current Parliament voted to leave, whereas they as a party were in favour of remaining. And now they're trying to face both ways. And what they've done today is actually...
Which the Liberal Democrats would never do.
Never, ever, as you well know, Joe. But what you've seen today is somebody who is in his heart a pro-European internationalist having to come forward and preach a fairly nationalist sermon.
Not that I want to put words into Labour Party people's mouths, but he would say he is offering something that is a bit softer than the Conservatives. He's accepted the result that Brexit is going to happen, but he is offering different priorities. When
it mattered in the Houses of Parliament, when we were looking at the bill to trigger Article 50, the Labour Party simply folded in the House of Lords. So you get a commitment today. Keir Starmer saying this is our day one commitment to preserve the rights of EU nationals. When it really mattered, Labour peers just went home and abstained.
Well, that is a firm policy position, though, to take, and that is different to the government's. But just to be clear, you will accept, if Theresa May wins this election, that she will have a mandate to take the UK out of the single market and that she will also have a mandate to complete the Brexit process without putting the terms of the deal to the people in a second referendum.
We shall see exactly what the outcome of this election is.
Sure, but I'm just saying, in that scenario that she wins, would you accept that?
The scenario that I want to talk about, and I think it's legitimate to talk about at the moment, is the need for the second vote, or the vote on the deal when we get to know it. And actually, that will still be right, whatever the outcome of this election.
Right.
So I will still believe in that.
So you'll support the second referendum.
Right.
I mean,
the referendum on the deal.
Theresa May has blamed the likes of Alistair Carmichael and Keir Starmer for frustrating the process, her negotiating hand, and that's why she had to call this snap election. But we know that's completely bogus now, don't we? Because they didn't block Article 50 being triggered, and there was nothing getting in the way of her Brexit negotiating stance.
No, I don't think that's true.
Well, there is. How many times was you defeated in Parliament?
Well, we managed to get it through, but it had nerves jangling, and we know that we've got...
well, nerves jangling is not quite the same.
And we've got a heavy legislative agenda with the Great Repeal Bill. We've heard from Keir Starmer he would scrap it, he said. He would scrap the key thing which will take back democratic control. And the Lib Dem position is not only we don't... Hold on, Alistair, I listen to you respectfully. Not only we don't respect the referendum, we're not going to respect the outcome of this election, and we want to sabotage the Brexit negotiations. So I think, frankly, the worst possible outcome would be Jeremy Corbyn propped up by the saboteurs.
But on the main question, jangling of nerves is not the same as blocking the Brexit process. Alistair Carmichael, you want to respond? You tried to?
You have a majority at the moment. You know, if, as Joe's very fairly pointed out, you had no difficulty really getting the Article 50 bill through. If your case is strong enough, you should be able, with the majority you've got, to get it through Parliament.
We've got a majority of 17. I don't think any government in our position going into these negotiations would not want a stronger mandate.
Dominic, You've got the DUP on your side as well. You've got a healthy working majority. There has been no point where you've really come, but thanks to the Labour Party and the weakness of the opposition you get from them, there's been no point where you've come under any real threat.
And there'll be a problem for you, for the Liberal Democrats, in areas like the South West, where at one time you were very strongly represented. But, of course, many of those areas, in those constituencies in the South West, many people there voted Leave. And actually, how much chance do you really think you have of winning back those seats?
Well, all the signals that we get coming from the campaigns in the South West are that there is a real resurgence in Liberal Democrat fortunes down in that neck of the woods. It's as far away from my own constituency where I've been campaigning as it is possible to get, but everything I hear is very positive. And of course it has to be said, and I think it would be accepted, that elections, whatever you say about them, are never actually on any one single issue, and there will always be other local factors that will have a bearing.
Just before I let you go, Dominic Raab, you will know a string of high-profile Conservative MPs have reportedly withdrawn their support from the Open Britain group because that organisation is going to be targeting some pro-Brexit Conservative MPs at this election, people like Nicky Morgan and Anna Soubry. Do you welcome that?
Well, look, I think it's important now, and Nicky and Anna have been very thoughtful contributors to this debate, albeit from a different perspective from me. I think it's important now for us all to rally behind the United Kingdom's negotiation so we can get the very best deal. So I do welcome it, but ultimately that's for others to worry about. And I respect Nicky and I respect Anna. They've been very thoughtful contributors to this debate.
And do you feel the same about Stephen Dorrell, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister? He is still supporting the campaign in his role as chair of the European movement. What do you say to him?
I say to everyone in this country, come on, time for the political haggling to end. Let's get behind the government and behind the country in securing the very best deal for the whole country. And to be honest with you, these campaign groups or the Liberal Democrats trying to scupper or sabotage these negotiations just make the risk of getting no deal more likely.
Are you calling him a saboteur? Is that the term you're going to use?
The Lib Dem policy is to...
Oh, because we don't agree with
Tim
you
Farron
doesn't make us a
said he wants to
saboteur.
grind this government to a halt. It's not particularly constructive,
It's called opposition, Dominic. You don't get it from the Labour Party. You do get it from the Liberal Democrats. You clearly don't like it, but it's part of being in government. So suck it up and get on with it.
Oh well, and on that, I'll leave you with your two messages. Thank you very much.
Theresa May says she wants a mandate from every part of the UK when she goes into Brexit negotiations. The Prime Minister was speaking in South Wales, taking the Tory campaign into what has traditionally been a Labour heartland. And she warned party workers to be wary of the polls and said they should not be complacent. From Bridgend, here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
If the Tories want headlines about a new Iron Lady, they're not very subtle about it. Theresa May came to inspect the steam and sparks in Newport. Must be doing something right, she joked. She needs to achieve a big if, turn Wales into Tory territory. It's audacious to pop up in rock-solid Labour land at the start. She was only with activists, with friends, but her appeal is to you.
Give me a mandate to lead Britain. Give me a mandate to speak for Britain. Give me a mandate to fight for Britain. And give me a mandate to deliver for Britain.
She would not be drawn, again, on whether she'll raise or lower taxes.
How far are you willing to go to grab seats in parts of the country that until now have been Labour heartlands?
So I will be out and about around the country in all sorts of areas, all parts of the country, taking this message. A vote for me and a vote for the local Conservative candidate is a vote to strengthen our hand in the Brexit negotiations.
Really? From coast to coast? Taking places like Porthcawl would mean taking lifelong Labour voters, like Brian and Ira, who've almost decided to do it.
It's the first time ever if I do it. First time ever. Because the valleys are Labour, well, as you know, Labour stronghold, isn't it?
I'm on the border, really, but I voted for out in the referendum. So I don't know whether to vote Labour or Conservative this time. I'm from up the valley.
My father would spin in his grave.
I worked in the colonies.
I'm a typical Labour voter, but whether I'll be voting Labour this year, because I got no confidence in Corbyn. But there again, I don't think I'll be voting for Conservative.
I'd put the same effort and thought into the way I voted as I did last time.
And would you tell me how you did vote the last time?
I voted Labour last time.
What about father and son, the Edwards, taking the sea air?
As he said, he's been Labour all his life. I think he's swung to Theresa May now, or Dad, haven't he, over the last couple of years of it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
She's absolutely wonderful. Mr. Corbyn, bye-bye.
Here, Labour's in charge in Cardiff, but even their leader admits Jeremy Corbyn has some way to go.
To prove himself as a leader and to prove himself as somebody who can be, as it were, Labour's candidate for Prime Minister. We have some weeks to go before the poll itself, but that is the challenge.
And even from the start of their campaign, Plaid Cymru won't hesitate to stir up old memories.
If people are considering voting Conservative, then I would ask them to remember the past. The Tories have been no friends to Wales.
We are not rolling over for any Tory to take our seat. So we are here, we're going to be out in force.
It's early days, but any day on the campaign trail is precious. Leaders only turn up to places where they think they're in the game, with possible gains in Wales and in Scotland too. Theresa May's not just contemplating a Tory majority, but hoping to make true her claim there are no Tory no-go areas. Brexit might have redrawn the map, but she wants to colour it blue.
Yet as she swept away reminders for Theresa May, it won't be easy. Here or anywhere else, the Tories can't be sure they'll always be welcome. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Bridgend.
So Theresa May says this election is about giving her a clear mandate for the tough Brexit talks ahead. For Labour, accused of sending confusing signals on Brexit, today was a chance to clarify its position. The shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, said Labour accepted that free movement of people could not continue, but suggested EU nationals could still be allowed in if they had a guaranteed job offer. He also said Labour would work harder to stay within the EU's customs union, which governs trade. And Labour has pledged to unilaterally guarantee the legal rights of EU nationals already living in the UK. Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, reports.
This is where the election's being decided, not in political meetings, but on the streets, in the homes and in the heads of voters. We're choosing a path for Britain after Brexit. And on this nation-dividing issue, Labour's taking a gamble that'll win some voters and maybe lose a lot of others. Here in Barking, in a lot of places where people voted Labour and then chose to leave the EU. Today, Labour's out to show it's more pro-Europe, more open to compromise than Theresa May's Tories from the start. EU nationals here would keep their rights. No ifs, no buts.
On day one of a Labour government, we will immediately guarantee that all EU nationals currently living in the UK will see no change in their legal status as a result of Brexit. Day one, big commitment.
After Brexit, old rights of free movement across the UK border had to change, but then more clarity on Labour policy. Get a job offer, he told me, and you're free to come in.
Freedom of movement has to go, and therefore it will have to change. But we must have immigration that works for our communities and for our economy. And that means that there has to be movement of people to come and work in this country. How that's managed will have to be resolved, but the last thing we want is for our businesses to go bankrupt.
Then he poured cold water on the Leavers' dream of using new freedoms outside the customs union to conquer markets beyond Europe.
I think it's worth keeping the customs union option on the table and seeing where we are in 2 years. But we have to focus on the EU trade agreement. That's 44% of our trade, and make sure that is our priority.
And not hypothetical free trade deals elsewhere in the world.
Well, the idea of hypothetical free trade agreements in April 2019 compensating for losing the EU is something nobody's contemplating, and that's why we have to concentrate on the EU trade agreement.
Till now, Labour and the Tories have been sounding more alike over Brexit than either side has been prepared to admit. Now, Labour's showing more of its pro-European colours. The party needs to motivate its activists and its loyal supporters. But around here, and in places like this, it's a gamble. For many people, Europe is a gut issue.
There's enough in this small island that otherwise it's not going to be like a ship. We're going to sink.
Yeah. No need to let the Europeans in to do those jobs.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, no British can get a job. All the foreigners and
other people coming in, they're taking them.
Labour says if you're a European and you've got a job, you're welcome. Are people welcome in that way?
Well, as long as they've got a job to come to, as long as that is documented and it's not just sort of a slip in, then yeah, I have no problem with that.
But now it's about which side can convince the voters. What do the others make of Labour policy? Not much.
This is the first time that we've heard this clarity on free movement. Unfortunately for both Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer, many on the front bench, the Labour front bench, don't agree with him.
You've got to feel sorry for him in one sense. He's trying to put a united front on a party which is absolutely split down the middle on this issue, as on so many others.
It amounts to something which is too little, too late and too muddled. I'm still not clear whether the Labour Party believes that we should be in or out of the single market. They say they now don't agree with the government's negotiating strategy, yet they fatefully voted for it in the House of Commons.
Labour's struggle to sell a clear policy line, but now it's campaign time and the task is to get people to like what's on offer, assuming they can get the voters' attention. John Pienaar, BBC News, Barking.
Election battle lines were drawn over Brexit today, with Labour and the Conservatives clashing over their rival plans. Labour pledged to guarantee the future of all EU nationals living in the UK and promised Parliament a final say. But they conceded freedom of movement would have to end. Theresa May dismissed Labour's plans as nonsensical and said it was Jeremy Corbyn's 7th attempt to come up with a clear policy. Our political correspondent Emily Morgan reports on the battle over Brexit.
This was the moment Labour hoped to silence its critics and give us their plan for Brexit. The Prime Minister claims it's the reason she called the election, and the opposition need to persuade voters they have a strategy. Step up, Sir Keir Starmer.
On day one of a Labour government, we will immediately guarantee that all EU nationals currently living in the UK will see no change in their legal status as a result of Brexit. Day one, big commitment.
He also admitted freedom of movement would have to end, but suggested EU citizens could get preferential treatment. So how do the two main parties' Brexit policies measure up? Labour will guarantee the rights of EU citizens in the UK straight away, whereas the Conservatives insist it is a priority in negotiations. Labour will give MPs a veto over any Brexit deal, something the Conservatives aren't offering. And Labour wants to retain the benefits of the single market while prioritising trade deals with the EU. Theresa May, however, says we'll have to leave both the single market and the customs union. But what would happen if no deal is reached? Sir Keir later was clear they'd go back to the negotiating table.
I don't think having a second referendum is the way forward here. We've said that you've got to accept the result and get on with negotiating. This idea the Prime Minister has that if in the autumn of 2018 there isn't sufficient support for her approach, she simply won't go back and negotiate, even though she's got time to do so. That's a political decision that she's taken. I think it's the wrong decision.
She was in a metalworks in South Wales today trying to steal votes in the Labour heartlands. Brexit, she says, is her turf, and she wants voters to know it.
What we've seen today from Labour is, I think, their 7th Brexit plan. It's yet another nonsensical Jeremy Corbyn plan for the future in terms of Brexit.
The Liberal Democrats insist they're the only party with a clear alternative to the Conservatives.
That's the choice. Do you accept that hard Brexit vision or you don't? The Liberal Democrats don't, and even after all the muddled clarifications from Labour today, it's clear that Labour basically agree with Theresa May.
It's fair to say Labour have clarified their position on Brexit today. The question is whether it's enough to woo voters on both sides of the argument. Emily Morgan, ITV News in Westminster.
And our political editor Robert Peston joins us now. Now, Robert, a week ago the Prime Minister called the election over Brexit. Is it now clear, do you think, where each party stands on that issue?
Well, the central issue is our relationship with Europe's single market and customs union. That's the arrangement which allows our companies to trade with Europe with no costs. The Tory position is that it wants to replicate as many of the benefits of membership as possible, but is not prepared to compromise by continuing with free movement of people or the rule of the ECJ. Labour's position is it would compromise rather more than the Tories would. And the Liberal Democrat position is they want to remain members of the single market and therefore on those sorts of issues would compromise completely. I suppose this could be boiled down to Theresa May saying, trust me, I'm the person who will deliver real Brexit. Labour saying, well, her Brexit could be a bit harsh. And the Lib Dems saying, actually, we don't really like Brexit at all.
Robert Preston at Westminster, thank you.
So Brexit has taken centre stage in the election campaign, with the shadow cabinet, with the shadow Brexit secretary spelling out Labour's strategy for handling Britain's withdrawal from the EU. Sir Keir Starmer said he'd seek to retain the benefits of the single market and would guarantee the rights of EU citizens living in Britain. At the same time, the cross-party Open Britain organisation lost the support of pro-EU Conservative MPs after outlining plans to campaign against some of their Brexiteer Tory colleagues. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports.
In Wales, where she says her mind settled on an early election, Theresa May visited a factory in Newport. Yesterday's polls in Wales pointed to an historic realignment of politics here, bastions of Labour falling into Tory hands. Her mission is now to dampen expectations of a landslide, to make sure her vote turns out.
The vote for any other party would be a vote for a weak and failing Jeremy Corbyn, propped up by a coalition of chaos.
A slogan revived from the last general election. Campaign advisor Sir Linton Crosby has told Tories he'd like to have had more time to devise and road test slogans, but they seem pretty settled on this one.
Vote for strong and stable leadership in the national interest. That strong and stable leadership. From a strong and stable government and strong and stable leadership.
A taster of the relentless repetition of slogans Theresa May intends to bombard you with for the next 44 days. Back in Westminster, Labour was speaking in longer sentences. Ahead of the party's manifesto, Labour's shadow Brexit secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, was trying to respond to critics who say Labour doesn't have a clear policy on Brexit.
On day one of a Labour government, we will immediately guarantee that all EU nationals currently living in the UK will see no change in their legal status as a result of Brexit. Day one, big commitment.
He also said the UK might not leave the EU customs union under a Labour government. And he said free movement of people from the EU would end, but EU citizens with job offers should be able to come to the UK.
They provided confusion and incoherence, frankly. Keir Starmer's the man who a year ago, or almost a year ago, resigned from the shadow cabinet. Why? Because Jeremy Corbyn could not provide the strong leadership necessary to negotiate Brexit, the most important negotiation of modern times.
A cross-party campaign announced it wanted Remain voters to vote tactically in seats like Chingford in Essex, in the hope of toppling prominent pro-Brexit MPs, like the sitting MP here, former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith. That led prominent Tories, including former Education Secretary Nicky Morgan, who had been in the campaign, to walk out. And it got a mixed reception amongst voters in Mr Duncan Smith's seat.
So I'm voting Brexit, and I voted for Remain, but now I'm pleased we're coming out.
So in the general election, which way are you going to vote?
I'm going to vote for Conservatives. I think she's doing a good... There's no one else to vote for. I think she's doing a good job.
We need someone who's prepared to stand up for us, and I think she will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. We all feel the same, yeah.
In the referendum, I voted to Remain. Yeah, so did I. And I think I would probably vote to tactically to get somebody who sort of is more pro-Remain, just so that things can swing a bit more that way.
The Open Britain campaign group is also trying to rally support for prominent pro-Remain MPs in 20 seats. Only one of those is a Tory.
Gary Gibbon. Well, a little earlier I spoke to Sir Keir Starmer. I asked him about the party's position. Keir Starmer, let's be clear. If the country votes for Labour, is there any chance whatsoever of us remaining in Europe?
No, we accept the results of the referendum, and what I've set out today is what the changed relationship with the EU should be. And so Labour say we should have an ongoing relationship. It should be based on cooperation, collaboration. We need to get from where we are to where we need to be. It's changing really from membership to partnership, because I think everybody accepts we want to trade with Europe.
Now, what if there's no deal? we still leave?
Well, the position I've set out is that the Labour Party would try to bring Parliament with it on the journey and make sure that we don't have no deal. No deal is the worst of all possible outcomes, crashing out in March 2019. And from a Labour point of view, we've been clear that should not be considered a viable option.
Well, but if there was no deal and we were confronted with that, presumably the possibility of simply staying would have to
Well,
play.
we would argue for transitional measures, for time to negotiate further. I think coming out without a deal at all, it's not just the trade arrangements that would be put in jeopardy, it is all the other arrangements that we put in jeopardy. So it is the worst of all options. And one of my great concerns about the Prime Minister's approach is that having put, as she has, immigration as the sort of key priority and the economy and jobs second, and we say they should be the other way round, she's led herself to a position where she's ruled out any relationship with the single market, she's ruled out any relationship with the customs union, she's ruled out any jurisdiction of the European Court, even when it would help businesses, and she wants to remove us from key agencies. She's effectively removed all the options from the table. And having done that, she's now saying that no deal is better than a bad deal, which just doesn't make any sense.
But you've ruled out any freedom of movement. And in doing so, do you have the agreement of your Shadow Prime Minister and your Shadow Home Secretary?
Yes, we've ruled out freedom of movement as it currently is, because that's an EU rule.
That is, they have too.
Yes, the Labour Party position. Yes, the Labour Party position is that freedom of movement will have to go. We will have immigration rules and regional management of migration, and that should work for the economy and for communities. In other words, we don't want businesses to be put in a position where they can't run their businesses, get the skills they need. Of course we don't. On the other hand, we have to take into account what communities are saying about their concerns about immigration. So it's not changing from freedom of movement to no movement. It's changing from freedom of movement to managed movement.
Restricted movement, we could
say. Well, managed movement, yes, where it's more based on the notion that if you're coming here to work, that's one thing, or you're coming here for family reasons. And I think that we should also take students out of the net migration figures altogether, and refugees should never have been in them in the first place. So when we break it down in that way, it's management of those that are coming here essentially to work.
So you are saying to young people, we are not going to enable you to live, love and work in 27 other countries without any problem?
Well, I passionately campaigned for us to stay in the EU because I valued it. What
you're saying tonight is it's over. If young people are looking in and thinking, shall I vote Labour in order to get all those rights back?
Well,
no.
What we say is, look, this was bound up with the referendum outcome, and freedom of movement has to change as a result, and that is to face the result of the referendum, to accept it, and to move on to a different position. I don't think it means that people can't move across Europe. Of course it doesn't. It doesn't mean that youngsters can't go and work in other countries or have family members in other countries. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means it's a managed system. It's not freedom of movement.
Keir Starmer, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP, Kwasi Kwarteng. Let's start with what Sir Keir Starmer's been saying all day, which is that it's rigid and reckless, in his view, for you to be shutting the door on the single market. I mean, you've got to admit that Theresa May is taking a risk. She's making a gamble.
I think we've rehearsed a lot of these arguments before, and I'm struck by the fact that Keir Starmer has moved very much to our position. You saw him in the clip say that he wanted to end freedom of movement. This was a position which his party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was not happy with. This is also a position which Diane Abbott, the Shadow Home Secretary, was not happy with.
But on the single market, there's a clear difference between Labour and yourselves. They don't want to shut out access to the single market.
Well, we haven't really started the negotiation, but what is key, and what I think was interesting in what he said, was that he was saying that freedom of movement, as we know it, has to end. And that's always been our position. And our position, the government's position, has always been that if membership of the single market meant that we could not restrict, we could not end freedom of movement, we would have to leave the single market. And it looks like Labour today have clarified what was a very muddy position and have actually come to accept the fact that freedom of movement must end.
Well, will you clarify whether you believe that Theresa May is taking a gamble? There is a risk involved in this negotiation, isn't there?
I think it would be premature to say what the negotiation will come up with.
But there is a risk.
But there's no doubt that Theresa May is a strong, stable leader. She enjoys huge confidence.
And enjoys a gamble.
Amongst wide sections of the people. And as someone said in the clip, she's really the only choice for where we are now.
So you're saying this is a risk-free? I mean, I'm just trying to push you on this issue of the risk.
Nothing in life very little is risk-free. But I think we're in very capable hands. I think we will have strong, stable leadership. I think, as one of your people in the clip said, she will fight for Britain, and she will have the country's best interests, and she will do that tenaciously and with a great deal of ability.
Well, if she's fighting for Britain and she's standing up for people, as she said on the steps of Downing Street that she wanted to fight burning injustice, why is it then that living standards are falling now? And this is partly because of the plummeting pound after Brexit.
Well, the pound has come up a bit. I'm not a currency speculator, but currency movements go up and down. But
well, I can tell you it's down 14% against the dollar.
The main point we have to realise in terms of this economic debate was that people on your programme were suggesting that there would be a recession in 2016. That didn't happen. Thankfully, it didn't happen. The economy is growing at 2%.
But living standards are falling because inflation is going up.
Forgive me, it's the fastest growing economy in the G7.
And inflation is at its highest for 3 years.
And we also learned today that the deficit is lower than it's been at any point since 2008. So generally, the economic situation is quite healthy.
You've never had it so good?
I'm not suggesting that. I mean, that would be a complacent thing to say, but I think things are going much better than many people anticipate.
Well, you try telling that. You're saying things are going much better. You try telling that to people who think, well, wages are falling in real terms. Do you accept that that's because of this Brexit gamble you're taking?
No. What I am accepting is the fact that many of the predictions that people said about how the economy would go into recession have been proved false. That hasn't happened. Now, you're quite right to say that the pound has depreciated. It's actually increasing in value now. I think people feel that they want to have stability. They want this election to be over and done with. They want to have a strong Conservative government with a leader who is trusted and respected throughout the world. And I think that's a very important thing when we try and reach economic stability.
Well, talking of economic stability, final question. Do you agree with the Chancellor that because of the economic uncertainties ahead, which you accept, that he needs the scope to be able to raise taxes if he needs to?
I think that the Chancellor wants to have as wide a possible action in what are uncertain times. We know that there are uncertain times because we've got this negotiation, the global situation, you've got North Korea, you've got lots of things going on.
So no repetition of David Cameron's promise on tax.
And the Chancellor needs to have much more wiggle room than sometimes manifestos give them.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you very much. John.
Well, our political editor, Gary Gibbon, joins us now live from Westminster. Gary, a clarifying day.
Yes, Tim Farron, the Lib Dem leader, has been, virtually every time he's been in front of a camera since this election was called, he's been asked whether he believes gay sex is a sin. He's swerved the question every time. I think yesterday when he was at a photo opportunity in South London as part of his campaign, his supporters started jeering reporters as they asked the question repeatedly. I think there was a feeling at the top of the Lib Dems that this was getting out of hand. Some sort of line had to be drawn under this matter. And he has now given an interview this evening in which he says he does not think that gay sex is a sin, and this is how he put it.
My view is, I'm careful about how I speak about my faith. I'm somebody who makes no secret of it, but does not bang on about it either. I don't think people want political party leaders telling them what is and isn't sin.
Well, we're being asked to believe that this is not some sort of epiphany for Mr. Farron. It's not that he's changed his view, he just thought that he would share it. The reason he wasn't sharing his view before, we are told, is because he didn't want to be drawn into theological arguments. He's an evangelical Christian, very open about his faith, and you have to assume that this is because the Lib Dems didn't either didn't feel that this was his view, or they didn't want him being drawn into other sorts of social issue questions, like, say, time limits on abortion and things like that. Mr. Farron has long been known to be not entirely swimming in the mainstream of prominent Lib Dems when it comes to issues like that. So it may have drawn a line under it, or it may have opened other questions. One other little tidbit from tonight, two Jeremys have met. Jeremy Corbyn has met the Cabinet Secretary Sir Jeremy Hayward to discuss what Labour would do as an incoming government. This is part of the regular procedures now at the time of an election, and the idea now is that civil servants will start meeting other shadow ministers, draw up plans, great big files would sit on the desk waiting to be implemented if Jeremy Corbyn comes to power.
Gary Gibbon at Westminster. Cathy.
Thanks, John. Well, back on the campaign trail, Theresa May has been quick to exploit a new poll suggesting that the Conservative Party is on target for a first election win in Wales in 167 years. The Prime Minister went to the traditional Labour heartland of South Wales to urge voters to join the Tory bandwagon. Our correspondent Andy Davies joins us from Bridgend tonight. Andy, what have you found there?
Well, there's certainly a spring in the step of the Welsh Tories right now. They cheered Theresa May into this community centre behind me and then grabbed selfies with her afterwards, capturing what they think could be moments along the path to a historic victory for the Welsh Conservatives here in Wales. At least that's what that poll you mentioned seemed to suggest yesterday. As for Labour, well, they've been the dominant party in Wales for so long, and they're certainly not going to surrender that status without an almighty fight.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give the warmest of welcomes, the loudest of cheers for the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Little wonder it was all smiles in Bridgend today as the Prime Minister addressed local supporters, because if a poll yesterday is anything to go by, then this Tory leader could be headed for a sensational victory in Wales.
Thank you very much, everybody, for that wonderful welcome. And it's great to be here in Wales. It's great to be here in Bridgend with 44 days to go to the most important election this country has faced in my lifetime.
The message was simple. Don't be complacent, every vote counts, framed in a narrative of Tories versus what she dismissed as weak, unstable opposition.
Give me a mandate to lead Britain. Give me a mandate to speak for Britain. Give me a mandate to fight for Britain. And give me a mandate to deliver for Britain.
Theresa May has made a big play today in Wales of trying to designate her opponents here as disruptors in the Brexit process, portraying them as intent upon frustrating her hand in EU negotiations. And no surprises there, of course. Wales, after all, did vote leave. Labour dismissed her visit today as a stunt, but with yesterday's polls suggesting unprecedented Tory gains in Wales in the general election, there's been much talk of Tory tanks on Labour's lawn. And in Cardiff this morning, seat of a Labour Welsh government, there was certainly a hint of defensive action in the air. The challenges facing Labour in Wales right now are significant, aren't they?
Labour face a perfect storm in Wales at the moment. Firstly, there's the wider Corbyn issue. Is he fit to lead the UK? Secondly, there's Brexit. Labour opposed Brexit in Wales, but the people of Wales, they backed it. And finally, there's the issue of public services. Now, Labour have been in government in Cardiff Bay for almost 20 years, so it's really difficult for them to say to voters, if you want to see your public services improved, back Labour.
Labour today said they were very happy to stand on their record on public services in Wales. But in Bridgend, held by Labour for the last 30 years, those intending to support the party this June appeared somewhat thin on the ground. Yeah. Who are you going to vote for?
I'm not sure yet.
Who did you vote for last time?
Labour.
And you're not? Why aren't you sure this time?
Him, isn't it? Mr. Corbyn.
What's wrong with Mr. Corbyn?
I don't think he's a statesman, is he? And we need a statesman to be Prime Minister.
Are you going to vote in the general election?
Yeah.
We're Channel 4 News. We're just asking, who are you going to vote for?
Huh? Not Labour.
Why not?
Okay.
Yeah, definitely not Labour. I agree with you.
I normally vote independent, but this time I think I'll vote Conservative.
And why is that?
Because I think I agree with Brexit.
They weren't all like that.
Always voted Labour. Always.
You'll vote again?
Think so.
And for what reason are you going to vote Labour this time round?
Because it's better than the Tories. Anything is better than the Tories.
But Labour must be wary of those suggestions that there are many in Wales who once left Labour for UKIP and instead of now returning, are choosing the Conservatives instead, like this voter. So let's just get this right. You were a Labour voter, you went to UKIP.
I went to UKIP.
And now you've gone to the Tories.
Conservative.
And what is it?
Because of Theresa May. I like some of the things that she said she's going to do.
Labour's Carwyn Jones, the First Minister of Wales and Assembly member for Bridgend, has conceded the party faces a real challenge. But he wants voters here to look at the bigger picture.
What we're saying to people is, look, as far as the Tories are concerned, what have the Tories ever done for Wales? Absolutely nothing. They've only destroyed the economy, destroyed jobs, and given a chance they do it again. The Tories will walk all over Wales, given half a chance, and at the end of the day we need Labour MPs in Wales who stand up for Wales and not a parliament made up of MPs who are little more than sheep with blue rosettes.
As Plaid Cymru launched their manifesto today, their leader Leanne Wood warned of dark clouds lurking of Tory rule. Plaid offered a ray of hope, she said. But like Labour, UKIP and the Lib Dems in Wales, they too will be hoping that yesterday's polls suggesting a resounding Theresa May victory in Wales isn't borne out on June the 8th.
Andy Davis reporting.